Welcome to Hope from History, where the ancestors teach yes you can, because yes we did. Addie Banks presents early Black entrepreneurs who have a history and business story to share. Today, many Americans invest in real estate to secure financial wellness. Hear the story of Bridget Mason, and keep in mind, never too late to get rich. Bridget was known as Biddy. She was born into slavery in 1818. By some accounts, she was born in Georgia. In others, she was born in Mississippi. She was owned by slaveholders in Georgia and South Carolina. Bridget had no last name until she gained her freedom at age 37. Her last owner was Robert Smith. Bridget and other slaves were wedding gifts to the Smith. After the wedding, Smith took his new wife to Mississippi along with his wedding gift slaves. While in Mississippi, the Smiths were converted to the Mormon religion, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Slaves could not be baptized into the Mormon Church, and members were encouraged to free their slaves. But Smith could not do so. In 1848, the Smiths and their slaves became part of a group of church members headed to the Salt Lake Valley in Utah Territory, which was then part of Mexico. 30-year-old Bridget walked the 1,700 miles behind a 300-wagon caravan headed to the Salt Lake Valley. When church leader Brigham Young sent a group of Mormons to Southern California in 1851, the Smith family volunteered to go. Smith and his family and slaves, Bridget included, set out in a 150-wagon caravan from San Bernardino, California, to establish a Mormon community there. Smith ignored Brigham Young's warning that slavery was illegal in California due to the Compromise of 1850 that admitted California into the Union as a free state. Any slave who resided in the state or was born in the state was free. This is why so many slaves or former slaves set out to reside in California. Bridget lived in slavery in California for 4 years, but she was under the control of Robert Smith and ignorant of the law that would have freed her. In 1856, Robert Smith became fearful of keeping his slaves under the California law, so he decided to move to Texas, where he planned to sell his slaves. But he told the slaves that he would take them to Texas and set them free. Bridget didn't believe him. She did not want to go to Texas and worried that once in Texas, she would be separated from her children like she was from her mother. Bridget asked questions. She asked her friends in the Black community. They told her about the California slave ban. But Smith was packing up and ready to leave for Texas. Bridget's friends devised a plan to rescue her from Smith. She and a group of slaves escaped and traveled toward Los Angeles, but Smith caught up with them. He took Bridget and the other slaves to a canyon near Santa Monica and held them there. A friend alerted the Los Angeles sheriff about Smith's plan to take slaves to Texas and where he was holding them in the canyon. The sheriff obtained a writ of habeas corpus and sent a local posse to reclaim the slaves, and then he put them in protective custody at the jail. While there, Bridget petitioned the Los Angeles court for her freedom. Smith testified that Bridget and the 14 other people he had kept in the canyon were members of his family who voluntarily offered to go with him to Texas. He bribed her lawyer to not show up to court. Bridget was not allowed to testify in court since California law prohibited Black people from testifying against white people. The judge presiding over the case, Benjamin Hayes, took the initiative to hear Bridget's side of the story. He invited her into his chambers and asked her what happened. She gave an entirely different account than Smith had given. She told him that she wanted to remain in California as a free woman with her children. She said that she wanted freedom for herself and all the other slaves held captive by Smith. After 3 long days, Judge Hayes re-entered the court. A hush of anticipation could be felt as onlookers held a collective breath. But Hayes ruled in favor of Bridget and confirmed that she was free. He wrote that, quote, all of the said persons of color are entitled to their freedom and are free forever, end quote. But further, he said, quote, he hoped they would become settled and go to work for themselves in peace and without fear, end quote. In 1860, Bridget received a certified copy of the document that guaranteed her freedom. As noted, Bridget had no legal last name as a slave. After emancipation, she chose to be known as Bridget Mason. Mason was the middle name of Mayor Amasa Lumen, the first mayor of San Bernardino, who was also a Mormon apostle. Bridget had known and respected him while living there. She had spent many enjoyable occasions in his home. Bridget Mason was introduced to Dr. John Griffin, a white native Southerner who was impressed with her nursing skills. Biddy worked for Dr. Griffin as a nurse and midwife. In fact, IRS tax records show that in 1862, Biddy Mason paid $10 for a license as a physician. She had a reputation as a midwife and a master of herbal medicine, so much so that Griffin paid her $2.50 a day. Bridget delivered hundreds of babies in Los Angeles. She was seen often carrying her big black medicine bag. Inside was the tools of her trade and the papers Judge Hayes had given her, affirming that she was free. She met other blacks in Los Angeles. One of them told her about investing in property. Dr. Griffin was also involved in real estate, and he urged Mason to buy property as a solid form of investment. Mason saved and became a shrewd businesswoman. When she arrived in Los Angeles, it was dirt roads and perhaps 2,000 people, and less than 20 were black. Frugal with her money, but in 1866, at age 48, 10 years after gaining her freedom, she bought 2 lots on Spring Street on the outskirts of Los Angeles for $250. This was her first property, but not her last. But still, a remarkable feat for a woman who had spent the first 37 years of her life enslaved. But Mason continued investing. Nearly 2 decades later, we find a booming Spring Street, crowded with shops and boarding houses. In 1884, Mason sold the north half of her Spring Street property for $1,500. On her remaining half, she built a 2-story brick building. She rented the first floor to commercial interests and lived in an apartment on the second floor. That same year, she sold a lot she had purchased on Olive Street for $2,800, a good deal more than the $375 she had originally paid for it in 1868. Mason continued making wise real estate decisions, and her financial fortunes increased until she accumulated a fortune of almost $300,000, approximately $6 million today, making her the richest Black woman west of the Mississippi. From her small wood frame house on Spring Street, she opened a refuge for stranded and needy settlers and a daycare center for working mothers. Her home was a site for organizations to convene civic meetings. She provided food and shelter for the poor of all races. Lines of needy people often formed outside the gate to her home. She frequently visited the jail, speaking a word of encouragement to prisoners and leaving some token with them as well as her prayers. Mason was instrumental in founding a Travelers' Aid Society, as well as an elementary school for Black children. In 1872, she became a founding member of the First African Methodist Episcopal Church of Los Angeles. Because of her kind and giving spirit, many called her Auntie Mason or Grandma Mason. During the Los Angeles flood in the early 1880s, Mason gave an open order to a little grocery store located on 4th and Spring Streets. By the terms of this order, all families made homeless by the flood were to be supplied with groceries, while Biddy Mason cheerfully paid the bill. While dedicating time to the poor, Biddy Mason was also known and respected by white dignitaries of the city and the state. She dined on occasion at the home of the last governor, Pio de Jesus Pica, in Alta, California. She socialized with politicians and wealthy citizens of the city. On Mason's death in 1891, dignitaries hailed her as a pioneer, a Christian, full of good deeds and a sterling example for helping her race and being an inspiration to all. At her death, Mason was one of the wealthiest women in Los Angeles, Black or white, and importantly, she left a legacy of wealth to her family. A tribute to this extraordinary woman is illustrated on walls depicting her life journey and her many contributions to Los Angeles. It is located on the original site of her Spring Street home. Perhaps Bridget Mason is best remembered for these words, quote, "If you hold your hand closed, nothing good can come in. The open hand is blessed, for it gives in abundance, even as it receives," end quote.